Hey, what's up out there, Luqman Nation? This is Abdul Shahid Luqman.
And this is Jackie Luqman.
Hey, aha, yeah, right. I fooled you. You thought you was gonna get Jackie first, huh? But you got me. We'd like to thank you and remember, if you didn't already, this is daylight saving time where we turn our clocks back because
Right.
it's fall back, spring ahead that I remember from back in the day.
Right.
So, and it already messed me up already today. But we're here with you today, Sunday, 6 o'clock, as we are every Sunday and Wednesday. And sometimes we fill up to it and give stuff in between. But Sunday and Wednesday at 6 o'clock is when we love that when we are that we regularly schedule. And so anyway, we had once again another very very strong news day,
Oh my
and
gosh.
this thing with the mass shooting in Sutherland this morning. But before we go on, we want to give you guys a chance to get settled.
Mm-hmm.
Go get your tea, whatever you have to do, settle down, pet the dog, take the dog out, whatever you got to do, because we really feel like today you really would, that what we have to offer today very would be well, it's interesting to us, and we hope that it'll be interesting to you. So Jackie, this thing in Sutherland,
Uh-huh.
um, the mass shooting in Sutherland.
Yeah.
You have some you have information that you would like to give. But one thing I got to say though
What's that?
is the fact that we had the shooting in Walmart not too long ago,
Oh yeah, that's right. That was last week.
right? And then we had the Vegas shooting,
That was to last month.
right, right. And so far, all of these people have been lone wolves. And my
Right.
question to you and to the audience and to the country is how many lone wolves does it take to make a pack?
Oh, that's a good
You know
question.
what I'm saying?
See, I mean we're not trying to make light of this situation, but that's a valid question because um, every time one of these mass shootings happens and it involves someone who is not black, who's not Muslim, who's not an immigrant, that person is not considered a terrorist. That person is considered a lone wolf, or just someone who a poor unfortunate soul who had mental issues that we're supposed to feel sorry for. And I know people are going to be, oh my God, why would you politicize this already? This is why anybody saying that people are wrong for politicizing mass shootings is kind of ridiculous. Let me show you. Let me see if I can pull this up so you can see what I am talking about, because it is uh, a really horrific state of affairs in the United States today in regard to mass shootings. Um, I don't think it is possible for anyone who talks about mass shootings, whenever they happen, to politicize them any more than the issue is already politicized just by virtue of the serious problem that we already have with them. And let me see. Let me see if I can pull this up so I can show you what I mean. Let me get this up here. Yeah, here you go. This is why the idea of anybody politicizing mass shootings when we talk about them as they happen is ridiculous. And it's a ridiculous distraction from the very serious nature of this issue. In the United States so far, this year, there have been 307 mass shootings.
Wow.
307 mass shootings in the United States this year, and it is not even the end of the year yet. This is from ABC Arizona channel 15 in Arizona, as you can see here. So this is a legit news source. This is not some blog post, you know. And you can see here the map. The circles indicate where all of the mass shootings in this country have occurred. The numbers in the map are the number is the number of the shooting. in the order that they occurred. That's why you can't. So this doesn't mean that there were 253 people shot in Washington. This is mass shooting number 253 of this year. As I said, this story was updated 47 minutes ago. A church shooting reportedly killing at least 20 in Sutherland Springs, Texas, marks the 307th mass shooting in the United States so far this year. According to data from the Gun Violence Archive, a total of 307 mass shooting incidences have occurred as of November 5th, up 27 since last month.
Up 27.
There were 27 additional mass shootings.
Wow.
And we only focused on the one in Las Vegas, but there were 27 more. Comparatively, last year, there were 483 mass shootings. The question is always raised, what is a mass shooting? Because people are always arguing about what is a mass shooting, what isn't a mass shooting.
Right.
The FBI defines mass killing and mass murder, so they're the so-called experts on what these things are and what they're not, what these events are and what they're not. And the FBI defines a mass killing as the killing of 3 or more people in a public place. But the federal agency also defines a mass murderer as someone who has killed 4 or more people in the same location. So in regard to mass shootings,
right,
just to simplify this, let's just say someone who shoots 3 or more people in a public place at the same time.
All right.
Let's just putting both of those definitions together.
Right.
And you come up with this. Oh, let me zoom in on that again. You come up with this.
That's frightening.
This is horrifying.
That is very frightening.
So for anyone to say of our commentary or anybody else's that that we are politicizing this issue by questioning when are people going to admit that we don't just have a bunch of random lone wolves. We don't have a lone wolf problem in this country. And we don't have time to get into the gun debate, so I'm not even going to talk about the gun issue right now. But we don't have a lone wolf problem in this country. We have a rabid wolf pack problem in this country. At what point, how many more of these are going to have to happen before we admit that we've got a problem with a crazed, rabid group of people, many of whom are not black, are not Muslim, are not immigrants, and are not categorized as terrorists because they don't fall into either one of the 3 categories. And they're also not ever called thugs because they don't fall into the first category of being black and shooting more. So, I mean, I know people are going to probably say, oh my God, how could you politicize this? This is so wrong. Listen, it's politicized already. Why? Because it's the 307th mass shooting in this country this year. That's an issue that can only be addressed using policy. But in order to address the issue using policy, you've got to admit that you have a problem in the first place.
You know what really bothers me, Jackie, is the fact that when they had the guy in New York the other day who killed 8 people by running them over, their bikes over. And immediately, I mean, you had the President of the United States talking about this guy should get the death penalty.
Right.
He was talking about, he called the guy an animal. Then he made statements about the Justice Department and how because in this country, there's due process. That's too slow. We need to fast track this. He even went further by saying that we should further restrict people coming over here from the diverse programs that we have, visa programs, and that we should do all of these things. Now, but can you imagine 307 incidences of mass shootings? Not once has anyone said what should be done about these people.
Right.
Well, not once has there been, as you had stated, Jackie, not once has there been any policy, any serious talk or debate about what do we do about people who have so far committed 307 incidences of shooting, of mass shootings, um,
Mm-hmm.
which my dog is making a lot of noise behind me,
He's
which have yeah, which have um, killed at least in each incident 3 or more people. Now,
right.
can you imagine if ISIS took credit for all of that? Can you imagine if so-called Islamic, if these were Muslims who were doing this, or so-called Muslims doing this? I mean, can you imagine the response from this government and and from the nation that 307 mass shootings were committed by ISIS? Can you imagine that?
Oh my God.
You know, so I can tell you what the response would be. We would no longer have any more freedom. What little bit of freedom that we enjoy now would be gone
Right.
if this was ISIS inspired.
Exactly.
But not once in all of these incidences have any serious talk of gun control or gun reformation, the justice support, and none of these things that President Trump had brought up the other day about what should happen to this one individual person in New York. None of these things came up about how do we stop enraged, and let's call it what it is, enraged white guys
Mm-hmm.
from going around, most of them white guys, going around committing this type of atrocities.
Right. I mean, the thing is that blows my mind is that, like you said, whenever somebody who commits one of these crimes is black, oh, we've immediately got a response for that. We need more police. We need harsher, criminal sentences. We need harsher. Have you noticed that whenever people talk about gun control, they always bring up Chicago?
Always.
It's like everybody has the answer to the violence, the gun violence problem in Chicago, a city that has one of the strictest gun control laws
Right.
in the country.
Right.
But they always talk about, oh, we need more gun control laws in Chicago, but they don't actually talk about, but then the people who are opposed to more gun control don't want to talk about the iron pipeline that funnels guns from surrounding states that have more lax gun control. I mean, people don't want to have an honest conversation. And I said we weren't going to talk about that, but I couldn't. People don't want to have an honest conversation about the issues surrounding violence that happen in certain communities. But they always want to bring those communities up
Right.
as like this political football, but they don't actually want to do anything about any of the, same thing with immigration. That they always talk about, oh, as soon as a non-Native American, like native-born American, someone who is an immigrant commits a crime, oh, yes, let's build the wall. Let's,
Let's restrict immigration.
clamp down
Right.
on these obscure immigration policies that, people have forgotten about. But they don't ever tell the truth about how the immigration policies came about, how long they've existed, how many people they actually do let in, and they don't even tell the truth about the people that they're talking about in the first place.
Well, that's true. It's funny that you said something about how they're experts when it comes to crime in Chicago, but let's be more specific. They're experts dealing with black crime, so-called black crime in Chicago.
Yeah.
So when you have a bunch of crime that is concentrated in black neighborhoods, then everybody's an expert at that. More law enforcement, tougher gun control, bring back the magical black fathers.
The magical black.
Everybody is full of answers when it comes to how to deal with so-called violent crime when it comes to urban areas. But again, from the NRA on down up to the government, it's always a reluctance to talk about what needs to be done about these types of mass shootings that are happening.
Right.
And another thing, Jackie, I got to say, I don't know if we have the statistics on this, but this took place at a church.
Right.
Some of the last few major mass shootings, at least the ones that have been brought to our attention, has been at churches. And I said this to you earlier, Jackie. I said that, Christians need to stop being so smug, and they need to stop being, they need to be slow and joining this right wing attack
Mm-hmm.
on the Muslim community. Because I can
Yeah.
tell you one thing: when was the last time you've heard of a mass shooting at a mosque in America? When was the last time that have you seen? We have incidences of so-called Muslims who have committed atrocities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and justice was swift with them. The Boston bomber, he's on death row right now. Did they kill him already?
I think he's still on death
All
row.
right, well, he's still on death row.
We drag it out.
Let's go back further to the DC sniper,
Oh,
John
yeah.
Muhammad, who was also Muslim, and he's dead. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, finally.
Right,
Yeah.
right. He's dead. And now you got this guy who's more than likely going to get the death penalty too.
Mm-hmm.
But you hardly ever hear, and you know, and when you want to take the statistics, and when anybody loses their life, it's a tragedy. So I want to say that.
Right.
But at the same time, the incidences of Islamic terrorism or so-called Islamic terrorism inside this country is extremely rare, and it's extremely low.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, we have already seen the statistics that white terrorism, for the most part, isn't rare. And so what are we going to do about this? You have a president who even refuses to call these certain incidences white terrorism.
Right.
The Charleston massacre,
Mm-hmm.
the Las Vegas mass shootings,
Right.
all
Right.
of those things that we, you know, he refuses. Even the white Uber driver up there in, I think it was Minnesota somewhere, but even the white Uber driver who went on a mass shooting.
Wow.
I mean, these incidents, rarely have any of them been called terrorist animals. It was always lone wolves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to dispense with the term lone wolves and call it what it is. It's a rabid pack of white terrorism.
I think you're right. I mean, when we, especially from the Christian perspective, I do have to clear up when I said that, you know, the DC sniper John Muhammad is dead finally. I didn't mean that I was glad that he was put to death, because I'm not cool with the death penalty at all, because it's a deeply flawed and deeply racist system. I meant that in the context of how long, if you know, we torture people on death row.
Right.
We do. I mean, the amount of time, and that's another reason why we need to dispense with it.
Yeah.
Because we do have people sitting on death row dangling this death date in front of them for decades. And so people are literally sitting there, you know, not knowing that they're going to be put to death, but not knowing what day I mean, that's torture. That's just mental torture. So that I just wanted to make sure I said that. But back to your point real quick on Christians not needing to be so smug about our role in this. The fact that conservative, quote unquote, evangelical Christians have been so instrumental in demonizing Islam and Muslims in this country, and that they have been so silent on the instances where white men who profess to be Christians and have committed mass shootings, mass murders, because of some grievance that they've had that's been tied to their faith. That is a part of this whole hypocrisy that makes Christianity in this country so unappealing. I mean, the lack of honesty within the Christian church.
I agree. I definitely agree
among Christians about the toxicity we've allowed, and the hatred that we have allowed to infect and fester our faith. The fact that we've allowed politics to dictate the public discourse of the Christian faith in this country is, I mean, that in itself is a sin, but it's led to the situation we have now, where you have people going in and shooting up churches.
Right.
And they're just literally just pissed off white Christian men who we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem with that is, part of the reason that's happening is that white people who have believed in the American myth, the American mythos that all you have to do is work hard and you can be successful. Well, they're not so successful anymore. The struggles that Black people and other people of color and other marginalized people have learned over the centuries to live with and work through and survive through. These people don't know how to handle though. That they don't know how to handle it because they have continued to believe this idea that they are specially equipped and entitled to benefit from success. If all they have to do is work hard,
Right.
and everybody else in this country who is not successful, it's because they don't work hard. They've believed that. So after they've spent all these years working hard and they see that they are no better off than anybody else, they're really angry about that. They're angry, they're disillusioned, that their view, their world view is destroyed, and they've lost their identity, and they don't know how to handle that.
You know, it's funny because I was just reading a comment, and this is one of the things that we have to be clear about too. Sandy said that, and she's not the only one that says that when these type of incidences come up, but Sandy said, well, welcome to Trump's America. And I just wanted to just say that we really need to be careful when we say stuff like that, because Trump's been in office for 9 months. We have 307 mass shootings so far this year, but we had 483 last year when Trump wasn't even president.
Right.
You know,
Right.
So we can't pretend that this animosity and this hatred that resides in the hearts of many Americans, this type of manifest evil that resides in the hearts of many Americans, is somehow is somehow related to Trump being president. No, I mean, this is systemic of a much deeper issue within our own culture. A culture of, I mean, how many incidences of road rage and Americans, and I'm glad you brought that point up, Jackie, about this disillusionment with the American mythos. This is a systemic problem in America, and it's because Americans are, and we said this with the opioid crisis, Americans are not happy people in large.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's not me saying it. This was something that was measured. This was something that was measured a couple of years ago when the article came out, and we'll try to find that article for you and post it, where out of all the industrialized nations of the world, Americans were the least happy, were the least happiest people on the planet. And a lot of that has to do with what we're told and what we're told to believe in, as opposed to what we see around us. We're overworked, we're overstressed. I mean, everything that goes into making, and we're definitely overstressed, and everything that goes into making a happy society, so far, we haven't received. You know, healthcare, infrastructure building, job creation, all of those things. I mean, a stronger safety net. All of these things that go into having a more happier and mentally stable society.
Right.
We have a government, and it doesn't matter whether Republicans or Democrats. We have a government that don't invest in those things.
Yep.
You know, so what happens is that then you add racism and classism on top of that, where you have a certain group of people who believe that they shouldn't suffer, that they shouldn't have to go through this, that if they just worked hard, as you said, Jackie, that these things would be available to them, and when they find out that, hey, look, you know, that's why it's called a dream. That's why it's called the American dream. It doesn't exist for most of us. So, you know, so what happens is that a lot of people can't handle that. And even in spite of all of the restrictions that we put in place as far as gun ownership goes, we have the background checks, we have this and we have that. But at the same time, how can you measure the psychology of a person who passes the background check? I mean, let's look at the guy in Las Vegas.
Right.
This guy didn't have a criminal record.
Nope.
He, for all purposes, I mean, he was like, I mean, if you were going to sell this guy a gun and you went by all the checklists that the government say that you're supposed to have, this guy was a prime candidate.
He passed them all.
He passed them all. So, and yet he killed 58, 59 people and injured a lot more. So what do we do? Because I can say, Jackie, at this point, there is no political will in this country to restrict gun ownership.
No.
There's none.
No, not reasonably. And even though most Americans do support reasonable background checks and waiting period and that kind of thing. Even gun owners, we're not anti-gun owner here in Luqman Nation. I know that's going to upset some people, but we're not. We don't have a problem with people legally owning guns. But there are some people who should never go near one. At the same time, there are issues that we have ignored in this country that create situations like the Las Vegas shooter. I mean, the reason, according to the sheriff, who talked about why he thinks this guy did what he did just a day ago, he said that the guy was unhappy because he had lost a lot of money. And we had talked about this.
Yeah, you called that.
I said,
you did call that.
Let me tell you what the problem is, because they talked about how much he liked to gamble. And I said, let me tell you what the problem is. He was used to being a wealthy guy because he was wealthy. He was used to being a wealthy guy, gambling a lot of money, losing a lot of money, and that not hurting him, and being able to still get the perks and the benefits of being a rich guy who spends and loses and wins a lot of money in Las Vegas. So now Las Vegas can't afford that kind of largesse anymore.
Right.
So he goes to Las Vegas and he's not getting the comps and the perks and the special treatment that he used to get anymore. And he's seeing his wealth dwindle. Mm-hmm. And he's angry because he's not benefiting from the wealth and the success that he felt like he was entitled to because he lived the American dream. Look, I understand that a lot of people are like, oh, that's a stretch. But you explain to me, you give us another reason for why there are 300 and 400 mass shootings across this country every year.
And I mean, that's no different than on individual certain stories we've heard of people who take their lives and the lives of their families because they lost all their money.
Right.
We watched the story not too long ago where a dentist, I believe he was a dentist, and his wife both jumped off of a skyscraper in New York.
Yeah.
Because they were saddled with debt.
Yeah, and they were upset because they had to leave the debt to their children.
Right, and they had to leave the debt to their children, and it was like they couldn't take that. So they, But I want to stay on this Christian angle because we're going to talk about and we're going to be more specific with this. But once again, where does the church fit in this? Right. And the reason why we use the church angle is because all of these politicians claim to be Christian. Right. Trump claims to be Christian. They all claim to be Christian. It's God, country, and apple pie, and and the Nationals, and all this other kind of stuff.
The Nationals?
Right, well, whatever your favorite team is. Okay. But, they pay this lip service to religion. Mm-hmm. And even in their unjust wars overseas, there's always the Christian West against, Islam, and refighting the Crusades and all this other kind of stuff. Yet, the church, and when I say the church, let me be more specific. The evangelical church, the white white nationalist church, which is my term for it, the white nationalist evangelical churches and all their minions that follow underneath them have yet to have stood up to this president, have yet to have stood up to this administration, have yet to stood up to the last administration when it comes to these unjust wars, curtailing America's war machine. Where are the churches when it comes to the anti-war movement? Mm-hmm. Where are the churches when it comes to all of these other social injustices? Not saying that they're not pastors and that they're not church organizations that are out there trying to oppose a lot of these unjust. But as a whole, the church is on the sideline. The church has cherry-picked social issues such as abortion, such as
gay marriage,
premarital sex, all of these other things. Education for Afghani women and all this other kind of stuff. But when it comes to the American military war machine, which is now building $1 million bases in Africa, which has had us in a war for about 17 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. So much so that when 9/11 happened, that if you had a child born on 9/11, they would be on their way to college, and all they've known is war. Right. So where are the people of faith when it comes to combating that type of perpetual war? This American war machine that we were warned about in the 50s by Dwight Eisenhower about the military industrial complex, how this would come to haunt us if we started going down that road, and we did. And as we find that we can't get any politician, not even Obama, had the guts or the will or even the power to even rein that behemoth back in. So this is why we challenge church leaders, and some of you are watching us right now, that there has to be efforts by the churches to indoctrinate the people with a revolutionary interpretation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, let me say this: we understand that not everybody's Christian. We understand that that there's some people who have no religion. But for those of us who do, these are who I'm talking to. So those of us who do, and the majority of Americans claim to be Christian. So that means the church has a very big responsibility as where this country is going and where it's going to head and who will be our elected leaders. You cannot ignore the church when it comes to that, because there is no such thing as separation of church and state. All you have to do on any election cycle is go to these churches, even in the black community, and politicians are there, talking to the congregation.
Yeah. I mean, and we have to, and this is why I prefer that our conversations about our politics and our faith be honest and rooted in reality, as opposed to how we wish things were, which is what people do all the time, right? People are always, there needs to be separation of church and state. Well, like you said, there isn't. And I can tell you how the, what I like to call the church of the white Republican Jesus has done politics for a long time, long before Trump became president. They would have, like you said, politicians come to the church and talk to their congregation, and black churches did it too. But something that white churches did, and for people who are like, oh, well, there's no such thing as a white church and a black church. Look, stop being Pollyannish about this. Sunday is still the most segregated hour in American life in this country. Still is. Martin Luther King Jr. said it was back then in the 60s. It's still true today. And that's just the reality of things. Having been a member of several different churches, I can tell you that's the truth. And so what a lot of white Republican Jesus churches do is the ones that are who believe that their mandate from God is to change the culture. And we're going to post a link to where that comes from, because that's not in the Bible. There's nothing in the Bible that tells Christians that it's our job to change the culture around us to fit a God-focused worldview. We're supposed to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. We're supposed to love God, love our neighbor as we love ourselves. That's our job. That's it. And in doing those things, there are some other things that we're supposed to do. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But conservative evangelical white churches will do things like they will hand out a little pamphlet called a voter's guide. I'm telling you, I've seen this. I've gotten one of them, and I looked at it and I said, wait a minute. I thought there was supposed to be separation of church and state. So what they do, they put in the voter's guide all of the politicians who are running in the local elections. Here's another little aside. For those of you, regardless of your political party affiliation, who all you ever focus on is the national election.
Right.
There are people in this country who have indeed impacted the culture because they paid attention to local elections when you didn't. So we had churches, politically conservative churches, directing their congregation how to vote by doing a simple act of passing out a little pamphlet that listed all of the candidates running in the local election, school board, city council, judge, sheriff, and listing their views, their position on the important issues to Christians. What are those important issues? School choice, abortion, gay marriage, premarital sex, or sex education in schools specifically. That's what they did. They didn't get in the pulpit and tell people you should vote for X, Y, and Z politician. They just passed out a voter's guide educating their congregation on what the positions of each of the politicians are. And then they get in the pulpit, the pastor would, and preach this theology that we call plantation theology.
Right. So, I mean, what is plantation theology?
So, plantation theology is the interpretation of the Christian faith from a white supremacist worldview. It is Christian Bible teachings that are defined by white supremacist authority that really are used to mentally enslave specifically Black people for the specific purpose of discouraging self-determination. Now, when white pastors do this to a predominantly white congregation, they don't think they're focusing on disenfranchising Black people. But when you have a white pastor who is standing in front of a predominantly white congregation, and they are preaching a sermon on love, right? Mm-hmm. Love and forgiveness. And they bring up the shooting of an unarmed Black person. This is what they do. I'm actually not making this up. I've heard them do this. They'll bring up the shooting of an unarmed Black person, and they will say things like, well, I understand that people feel that justice is not served, and I understand that, this was a wrong thing to do, and people might disagree with how the police handled this, but protesting is not the way to do it. Protesting is not the way. This is not the way God wants you to respond to injustice. You are supposed to forgive. God wants you to forgive because God says, if I don't forgive my brother who I see, how can God forgive me? This is what they preach.
So let's go on the other side.
Okay.
Because the purpose of us bringing attention to plantation politics is because let's make something clear that when white preachers do that, a lot of times the plantation politics is used to control the poor whites.
Right.
And they tell the poor whites, well, it's not the corporations that are your problem. It's not the government that is doing everything against you that's a problem.
Right.
No, it's the gays and right. And it's the fact that you have all these abortions and and it's all these other things and so this plantation politics used on poor whites. The fact that our government has to give Blacks all this welfare and we're the true Christian value is that you teach a man to fish, because I've heard a Black person say that. But the purpose of this discussion is to talk about the most disenfranchised group of people who are statistically are the biggest church goers, and that's Black people.
Right.
Black people are politically weak, economically weak, socially weak. Poor white people at least have social capital. And social capital, if you don't know what that means, is that most of the time white people, if they've been in the area long enough, even if they're poor, they know someone who can help them do this, or they can rely on, the cops know them, and because they've been in the town all this long time, and even though Joey gets drunk every day, we can just call his parents and send him home and all this other kind of stuff. It's and you usually find a lot of that in small rural towns and places like that. But Black people don't even have that. There's no social capital. You try asking a Black person to help you get a job, and they've been on the job 30 years, yet they'll tell you, "Oh, I'm still holding on." You've been there 30 years, you're still holding on. But we use plantation politics because there's something in the church that I see which is very dangerous. And the dangerous part of it is when we're talking about, the Black church used to be the hotbed of political activism. We know that from our history. That during the time of slavery, Nat Turner,
right,
who used the Bible and biblical teachings, and he interpreted in a way where it meant that he was responsible for freeing himself. He prayed to God, but he knew that faith without works was dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so he felt that the Bible says that I'm not supposed to go through this. And my interpretation of the Bible is the fact that I was born free, and it's my duty and my job to ensure that I get free by any means necessary.
Mm-hmm.
This also was shared by Denmark Vesey, who wasn't a slave, who could have just ignored his enslaved brethren, but he used his Christian teachings as a way of planning a rebellion against slave institutions. So we got plenty of history there, all the way down to Martin Luther King and others who used their Christian faith as a way of liberation. But there's a shift that happened in the church, in the black church especially.
Mm-hmm.
The black church went from being an activist church to a prosperity,
respectability,
right? Prosperity, respectability, apolitical institution.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got a few black ministers that's political, but not on the level that we were in the 60s and the 70s, even before then. So now we got poor, disenfranchised black people who should be the most political in this country, being told by their church leaders and what those church leaders are preaching, that they have nothing to do with this,
mm-hmm.
that all they got to do is pray it away,
mm-hmm.
that all they have to do is look towards heaven and all of that will be there, as I call the pie in the sky mentality,
right?
That all they have to do is just wait on Jesus and pray to Jesus and all this stuff will be straightened out for them.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring the very Bible verses, ignoring the very scriptures that you claim to believe in that gives an opposite message to that.
Right.
So the thing of it is the fact that now you got black people who's going to churches where the pastors, for the most part, they're doing fine, but you got poor black people going to church, and instead of being told that their existence, that they should not accept the existence that they're in, and that they need to be proactive about it.
Mm-hmm.
That they need
mm-hmm.
to be proactive about it. No, we have been reduced to, I'm blessed, I'm too stressed to be, I'm blessed to be stressed, and all of these bumper sticker Christian sayings, church, no, they ain't even Christian saying, bumper sticker
right.
church going sayings,
mm-hmm.
that all it is nothing but opium for people who should be out there in the streets every day fighting for their rights.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they should be doing.
Exactly, and that comes from, and why do we call that plantation theology? Because aside from the fact that it comes from a white supremacist interpretation of biblical teaching, it's also black people parroting the teachings of white pastors, of white leaders. We've got black pastors. There's a church in our community. We talked about this church before.
Mm-hmm.
That's not too far from us. That has a big old sign on the side of the church
mm-hmm.
that says, and it's a black church because there's a bunch of black people that live in this neighborhood. There's a big old sign on the side of the church that says, Black lives matter. But if Black lives matter, then we need to stop killing each other first. You believe that kind of narrative about black people fighting for equal and fair representation under the law and conflating it with respectability
right.
politics. You believe that because white people told you that you don't have a right, that we don't have a right to fight for our rights under the law because a small percentage of us commit crime. That is white supremacist thinking. Because I guarantee you, white people are not sitting in the church up in their pulpits talking about America isn't great because Helen in Arkansas drove her minivan into the ocean with her kids last week. That is not a conversation that is ever happening in any church full of white people that is being preached to by a white pastor. White people in America do not invalidate their right to greatness or superiority because some white people cause problems. That narrative is reserved for marginalized people. That is a function of white supremacy. And too many black pastors, preachers, bishops, religious so-called leaders have not only bought into that narrative, but they've been preaching it to their congregations for decades. And it's such a shame because everything we need to know and understand to put the works behind our faith is in the Bible. All we've ever had to do is just read the book and respond to these people with what's in the Bible, like what's in Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. Y'all aren't going to burst into flames if I read some scripture to you. You'll be all right. This is actually in the Bible. This is for all those people who say we should just pray about these issues of injustice against black people all throughout the society and do nothing. Luke 18, verses 1 through 8. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him, the judge, with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time, the judge refused, but he finally said to himself, even though I don't fear God and I don't care what people think, because this widow keeps bothering me, I'm going to make sure she gets justice so that she won't eventually come back and attack me. Because eventually, see, I'm going to get on her nerves, ignoring her, and she's going to take her frustration with her adversary out on me. And the Lord said, the Lord being Jesus, Jesus said to his disciples, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? So yes, we are supposed to pray. But according to Jesus, we are supposed to put some works behind that faith. So the idea that people who are on the receiving end of injustice in this country, all we're supposed to do is pray, that's not the example Jesus gave. But this is the story black preachers are telling a lot of their congregations. And,
exactly. I mean, I agree. I mean, we follow, like we said before, we follow a lot of content. We go to a lot of churches. And it really, to be honest with you, Jackie, it really bothers me when you can, when you share information, especially to a largely black audience, that in 36 years, unless we do something different, black people will experience zero wealth growth. Mm-hmm. When we talk about the disparities in our education, and when we talk about being further marginalized through gentrification, and when we talk about even on the African continent, how the American war machine is continuing to cause destabilization in Africa. Mm-hmm. So even the Africans themselves can't get themselves together, only so that corporations and businesses and stuff can loot the resources that are there.
Right.
That directly affects us. Yet you get no traction, man. Mm-hmm. And I have to ask myself, what are y'all afraid about? We've been too conditioned in this country to love entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been too conditioned in this country to always be to love what they call it, keep it light.
Right, right.
But the fact of it is that we live in a world that while you're keeping it light, man, they keeping it heavy. You know what I mean? And so what happens is then we get panicky when something is right in front of our face, and then we sit up here and say, "Oh my God, what are we going to do? Oh, this and that and the other." But when the information was coming to you, you choose to ignore it.
Right.
And I don't get it. I don't get how a people who are last in everything can afford to be apolitical. I don't get it. And the thing of it is that a lot of black pastors out there, a lot of them, you're lulling your congregation to sleep with this pie in the sky nonsense instead of going to your people and organizing them. I don't care if you're a big or small church. Even the smallest church can organize their people to do something when it comes to social activism. And you will be operating within the prophetic tradition of your faith. Mm-hmm. So this is the Luqman plan that we was going to share the last time, but I'm going to be brief about it, Jack, if I turn it over.
Okay.
This is what needs to happen, mm-hmm. black churches. First of all, get out of the individual mentality that so many of y'all have. This is my church. That's their church. I should not have to drive down any street in ghetto America and see 10 churches on one block on a Sunday, and everybody's coming out of that church. You know what 10 churches mean to me? 10 different ways that you're splitting poor people's money where if you put it together, then the community could benefit.
Oh.
But see, some of y'all pastors, your ego's too big. You don't want to work like that. But what should happen is that them 10 churches should come together, form an alliance, and say, look, we can all keep our buildings, we can all keep this, but when it comes to the money, then we're going to we're going to put things in place where we can take those tithes and those offerings and make it work for the community.
Mm-hmm.
That means housing. That means everything that the community needs. After school programs, all this other kind of stuff. Because since y'all don't want to, as the lady in the parable, y'all don't want to get on the government's nerves and demand this stuff, then you got to do it for yourself.
Right.
So if you're all about doing it for yourself, take that money and make sure that it's used for the community. We have a leadership where all the pastors can get together and can formulate these programs and stuff. Nobody's saying that you got to give up your church. Nobody's saying you got to give up your congregation.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if the strongest institution in the black community, which is the church, it still remains the strongest and the wealthiest.
Mm-hmm.
Black churches had took in $450 billion in tithes and offerings over the last 30 years. You know what $450 billion can do for black America?
Oh my gosh.
So the thing of it is that the churches remain the most influential and the most wealthiest institution in the black community. And so this is, that is, you cannot, you would be doing a disservice to your congregation and to everybody else who attend these churches not to put the resources together in order to make sure that black people could enjoy some kind of quality of life, since y'all don't want to petition the government for it. And and black pastors, y'all need to become bolder when it comes to politics. You need to educate yourself on what's going on,
mm-hmm.
and take that and ignite fire underneath your congregation. But trust me, every Sunday, the people you preach it to every Sunday, they got bills. They don't know how they're going to make it. And I ain't got to tell you all that. You already know. So stop giving them that pablum and talk about, just pray to God, everything will go. No, that ain't how it works. What works is that you got to go out there and do something in order to make sure that next generation make it. That's what you got to do. I mean, heaven, talking about your mansion in the sky and all this other kind of stuff. A lot of us want our mansion right now. Malcolm said one time, Jackie, he said, why I got to die to get to heaven?
Right.
Why can't I have it right here?
Exactly.
Well, we can have that here, but that means that we need you pastors, man, to get on board with that.
Exactly. And I love that you, in reading that scripture, I actually missed that connection at first. I love that you brought up with the scripture that I read from Luke chapter 18, verses 1-8. This widow petitioned the government for her justice. She said she went to the judge, who was a representative of the government. And she said, give me justice against my adversaries. But we got people in the church, white people and black people, preaching the message from white people that we shouldn't be asking the government for justice. There's nowhere in the Bible that says that. As a matter of fact, the Bible actually tells Christians that we are supposed to, and we read this last week, open your mouth for the mute. Proverbs 31, 8-9. Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. That doesn't mean for God to recognize them. Rights are a man-made kind of thing. We're all born free, according to God. But it is man who determines rights. That's talking about the law.
That's right.
And the Bible says, open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy. Why is this so important as far as politics are concerned? Because, see, this thinking bleeds into how black people look at politics.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where, like you said, we're either apolitical, and every time black people start talking about politics and the injustices and the structural racism and the racialized income inequality and the education, we know black people. I've gone to church with black people who don't talk to me anymore, because they think I am too negative. Because I'm telling them the truth.
Oh, talk about that.
Honey, I'm not negative. I'm just living in the real world.
That's right.
I'm just living in a real world where 36 years from now, our people will have no wealth. I'm dealing with people who are so focused on the prosperity gospel that God wants us to be rich, that they believe that profiting off of the disenfranchisement of black people is a plan for them. I just, because that's what the white supremacist interpretation of biblical principles tells them. White supremacy profited off of the backs of black people and other people of color. Why shouldn't they? And they don't even make the connection. So you got that group of people, right? Mm-hmm. Then you've got the other group of people, black people, who are involved in the church, like you said, the black politicians, who are involved politically, but they still don't advocate for black people. They're involved politically because they are they're self-enriching. Mm-hmm. They want to enrich themselves, and they believe in a kind of plantation politics. Because their idea of politics is that they will let white people, through the white supremacist lens of thinking, shape policies for black people.
Right.
So you've got these politicians like Barack Obama. Yeah, he was. It was historic that a black man was elected president of the United States, but he still didn't do very much to change the needle for the black masses in this country, because he pretty much subscribed to the plantation politics of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I think I need to make clear as I wrap this up real quick that when we say plantation politics, we're not talking about the way the conservatives say, talk about, the Democratic Party is the plantation because, the Democratic Party gives black people all this free stuff and it makes them dependent on the Democratic Party. First of all, no enslaved person on a plantation got anything for free. And the enslaved were not dependent upon the plantation. It was the other way around. That's why they were enslaved. That's why they weren't allowed to be free, because the plantation and society was dependent upon the labor of the enslaved. And the Democratic Party hasn't given black people free squat. We haven't been given free anything. We can't even in the Democratic Party get policies addressed, not even seriously talked about by black politicians. The Congressional Black Caucus.
And they all go to church.
We just had Donna Brazile, an excerpt from Donna Brazile's book where she said when she had to call Bernie Sanders and tell him about the purchasing of the DNC by Hillary Clinton for the use of her in her campaign, she actually said in her book that she lit a candle because she was so verklempt that she lit a candle and put some gospel music on. But she could use that faith to ease her consciousness, to tell someone who was unjustly robbed of an equal opportunity to participate in this so-called democracy. She could do that for him, although we believe she knew that long before then, but that's a whole nother show. She could do that for them, but she couldn't light a candle and put some gospel music on to gird her spine up, to go in front of the DNC and say, listen, if we do not address the issues of racialized income equality, if we don't put forth some legislation that deals with racial discrimination in the workforce, if we don't do something about legislation to equally and fully fund public schools, especially in poor neighborhoods, if we don't put forth some actual legislation to deal with the extrajudicial killings of black and brown people in this country, not another black person should vote for this party.
But you ain't going to get that, just like you're not going to get the black caucus, congressional caucus. And I'm going to tell you what they do, and then we'll end here. Is the fact that, all of them are probably prominent members of their church because they are who they are. Mm-hmm. And the black church has become the black church needs to go back to being socialist. The black church right now is too full of classism.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. It really has drank from the wells of American consumerism and materialism
And capitalism.
and capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is that the church needs to go back to its socialist roots. The black church go back to its socialist activist roots.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it needs to do, and stop trying to be the world light. And what I mean by the world light is stop modeling. What Jesus said that we should be in the world, but not of the world.
That's right. That's
right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the church needs to start following that practice. Go back to being a socialist, activist church. Stop caring about personalities, put the principles over the personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Start educating your people politically.
Yes.
Not just spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Educate them politically, because when they get educated politically, then that's when they're going to want change.
Mm-hmm.
But if you keep lulling them to sleep with these old passive, pump behind spiritual messages that you constantly feed your congregation, and year after year, administration after administration, nothing changes for them but get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Then you know what, shepherd? You are the one that's going to have to be held responsible for that.
Exactly.
Take us home, Jackie.
I shall take us home. So this week has been eventful. I don't know what else we can say about the whole DNC situation. I feel like I definitely need to make it clear that we're not in the business over here of demonizing Donna Brazile just because she's Donna Brazile. She is a neoliberal Democrat. And just because she's black and just because she's a woman, it doesn't mean that she is above criticism. I'm glad she told the truth that we all knew, and the smearing of her, calling her a liar and all this kind of stuff that the DNC and HRC loyalists are doing. Oh, that's uncalled for, but we also knew that they were going to do that. But see, that's what happens when you invest in plantation politics.
Yep.
Because, see, the people who actually have the power, they're never going to give you equal power. Your loyalty to them is never going to result in equal power. You're just going to be used by them to get what they want. That's why these people who are in both political parties, these black people with whatever power and influence they have who are in both political parties, need to stop telling black people that we need to unify and support everybody else in their message, everybody else for their fight for what they want. They need to stand up for black people, or they seriously need to get out of the way. So that's our show for today. Thank you all very much for joining us here live on Luqman Nation. And we will be live again on Wednesday at 6 p.m. unless something extraordinary happens.
And just a reminder, those turn on icon buttons so you can get notifications of when we go back on live.
Yes, yeah. When this stream ends, there are two buttons, I think. One that says turn on notifications, one that says follow. Click both so you can get a notification when we go live, and so that you can follow us. You can find us on YouTube if you want to watch this video again and share the video from YouTube. Just search for Luqman Nation, LuqmanNation, 2 words, Luqman Nation. We are doing a documentary on Baltimore. I know you think you know what this documentary is going to be about, but we promise you, you don't. We do need your support for this documentary. Please consider becoming a patron of Luqman Nation. We are on Patreon. Search for Luqman Nation. You can also give us a one-time donation. We'll provide you a link to our PayPal, but you can find us under Luqman Nation. Share this video, like this page. What else?
I got nothing else.
I got nothing else either, you all. Have a great evening. Peace. Be really, really good to each other.
Baltimore is burning, but as the fires continue to burn, People here left asking if the police have done enough and whether this violence is really about the death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray.
It has been a night of chaos, violence, lawlessness in Baltimore over the death of Freddie Gray.
Right now, the National Guard is on the scene trying to restore peace. And as we said, all public schools are closed today.
On Sunday, April 12th, Gray was taken into police custody. The arrest once again captured by a bystander's cell phone.
Hey, that boy leg look gross.
Gray seemingly in pain and screaming, unable to walk, as officers drag him into a transport van. Reportedly, when he arrived at the police station a half hour later, he was unable to breathe or talk. Medics rushed him to the hospital. A few days later, he slipped into a coma and then later died from a severe spinal injury.
Baltimore's poverty rate is nearly double the national average.
The unemployment rate among young African-American men hovers around 30%.
High school graduation rates for black males are devastatingly low.
A lack of access to labor markets, healthcare, housing.
It has chronic severe drug and crime issues.
One of the highest violent crime rates in America.
Since 2011, the city of Baltimore has paid out close to $6 million in court judgments or settlements to victims of police abuse.
So far, there have been more questions than answers regarding his death. It's still unclear why Gray was arrested. According to the police report, Gray fled unprovoked upon noticing police presence.
This has been our response to communities asking for resources. Law enforcement